Joining us to talk about the election and the aftermath and so much more is Congressman Jake Auchincloss. He's a Democrat and won re-election to represent Massachusetts' 4th District. And many communities in that district voted for Donald Trump over Vice President Harris. So we want to start there. Why do you think that was? What are you hearing in these, sort of days after this election?
Thanks for having me on. Not just many communities in the Massachusetts 4th, the biggest city in my district, Fall River, for the first time in its modern history, voted for Republican. In 2004, Fall River had voted for John Kerry, for example, by about 75-25. This year, it was 52-48 for Trump over Harris. And as with any election, it's multifactorial, but number one issue is cost of living, housing, utilities, health care. For 2 years, Americans suffered from demoralizing inflation, and they responded viciously at the ballot box.
Did Democrats maybe go too far and lean too far into the democracy aspect and not necessarily the dollars and cents of everyday pocketbook issues?
When I look at my fellow House Democrats, and we're obviously still in the running to take back the House majority, they were talking about cost of living issues. They were talking about kitchen table issues. The challenge is that Joe Biden was in the Oval Office when Americans experienced, for the first time in their adult lives, it's really been since the 1970s that we've had inflation, the incumbent gets tagged with it. And that's not true just in the United States. That's been true in every single developed economy throughout the entire world. The party that was in government for those 2 years after COVID, when everybody experienced inflation, every single party of governance lost vote share. And that structural headwind was just gale force.
You know, I'm a big fan of saying, your feelings aren't facts. And then, of course, when we talk about the economy in the United States and how healthy it is and how it's rebounded better than any of our cousins across the Western Hemisphere from COVID, and inflation is leveling off, and the job situation is great, and people say, but my eggs are costing money. Yes. How do you make an argument to people around facts while acknowledging their feelings? What else could the Democrats and the Harris campaign have done?
So you're right. Real wages have gone up from 2019 to 2024. Productivity growth has gone up. Unemployment is down. Small business starts have improved. So the U.S. economy is the envy of the world. But inflation is a very destabilizing psychological phenomenon. And the number one thing Democrats cannot do, any politician cannot do, is patronize or condescend to voters, to act as though your day in, day out experience of your dollars not going as far is not valid because of A, B, and C. And we have to recognize reality. And then number two is you have to have a audacious agenda for how we're going to get through it. And if you look at housing, health care, and energy bills, what that requires is we've got to build in this country. We've got to build 10 million units of housing. We've got to build 1,000 nuclear power plants. We've got to do more to productize and automate elements of health care that are driving inflation so that we are not eating up 50, 60, 70% of people's wallet with those three sectors.
You have the folks sort of in the aftermath of this saying, well, the progressives, the left, liberals, whomever, are sort of in these different factions, and that's why Kamala lost. She went too far to the center instead of reaching out to the left. Where is the Democratic Party today, and how can all those different factions within the party coalesce to, hopefully, not hopefully necessarily, I want to say hopefully, but to get done what they want to get done?
Right. This is a country of 330 million people, and we have two parties, so both parties are always going to be coalitions, right? I think the distinction that matters is the strong perception of Democrats is that they're not for me. They're for the other person. They're for they're a coalition of different constituencies that one by one they are trying to address, as opposed to being for me. And Donald Trump has achieved that authentic connection with his base, where they think that he is fighting for them. Now, I disagree with that perception. I think that he's fighting for himself and his family above all else. But if we're going to win in 26 and in 28, we have to flip that script in the way that FDR was able to do and JFK was able to do and Barack Obama was able to do, where the average American feels like Democrats are for us.
He was obviously able to do that through the use of X, through podcasts, going on with Joe Rogan, sort of reaching that voter who gravitates toward those folks. You also hear a lot of folks saying the left needs that. The left needs its own X and its own Charlie Kirk and Joe Rogan. Is that the solution to fight that sort of information hose with your own?
So I'm not sure my critique of the left would be that they're not online enough. What I would say is this, and you two are more acutely aware of this than I am. The old traditional model of media has been broken. No longer can you do a press conference, no longer can you do a cable news hit and say, I've hit my voters and I've communicated. We are in a balkanized media landscape. You have to go everywhere, you have to be fearless, you have to be effective, you have to shatter echo chambers to communicate with voters. I got my start in politics by knocking 14,000 doors. It was one conversation at a time. And at the national level, I think the mentality is the exact same. One podcast at a time, one Twitch chat at a time, one town hall at a time. There is no shortcut, and it is communicating, and it's also about communicating policy. People will say voters don't care about policy, they don't want to hear it. I profoundly disagree with that. I think there is a huge appetite amongst voters of all stripes and walks of life to dig into the policy details.
All right, let's look ahead to 2025. Are there any areas that you think that you'll be able to work with the Trump administration, with the Republicans, tax cuts maybe, or, you know, we obviously had the issue with the prescription drug prices that Trump said he did, but he didn't. I mean, what do you think? Is there something that you think you can accomplish together?
Yes. First order of business is guardrails. He has promised to politicize the military, to politicize the Department of Justice, to appoint RFK in charge of healthcare in this country. We're going to fight back against any of those attempts because we have to protect the integrity of our institutions and the health of Americans. But there are going to be lanes that we can work together on. I'll give you a few examples. One, I'm the co-chair of the fentanyl working group. We can interdict fentanyl supplies being exported from China to the United States. That's a bipartisan issue. Number two, taking on the drug pricing middlemen known as pharmacy benefit managers. They're bullying pharmacists, they're price gouging patients. That's a bipartisan issue I've done a lot of work on. I think we can get a deal there. On the tax code, they're going to want to cut the corporate tax rate. We're going to disagree on that. But what we might be able to agree on is expanded child tax credits, fixing the R&D tax credit issue from the 2017 bill, and other things that put cash directly in the pockets of average Americans. I think that we could drive compromise there.
All right, I want to read a tweet that you put out on Wednesday having to do with the war in Ukraine and Russians meddling in our election. And responding to a tweet from a Russian government official, you wrote, "Today would be a good day for Biden to lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of American weapons in Russia, call in bomb threats to our polling locations. Real bombs come your way." And I want to let you know that people are talking about the bomb threats that were made toward polling locations in Georgia. The FBI said some of them may come from Russian email domains. Let's start with the bomb threats and then Ukraine. What's your reaction to all this, and what should we be doing?
Unacceptable that an adversary would think that they could interfere with our election to that extent and that aggressively. Let's zoom out, though, for a second, because it's a much bigger problem than bomb threats. We have an axis of authoritarianism that knits together China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they have a very thin ideological alignment, but a very deep commitment to attacking the United States. That's the one thing that binds them together. And if anything crystallizes that, it's the fact that North Korea is invading Europe right now. If that doesn't merit a response, I don't know what does.
North Korea has troops in Russia.
North Korea has troops in Ukraine.
Yeah,
Right.
Ukraine.
And to date, Joe Biden has resisted significant bipartisan pressure to authorize Ukraine to use ATACMS and F-16s and other U.S.-made weapons to hit inside of Russia. Russia's hitting inside of Ukraine. Why can't Ukraine hit inside of Russia? Troop staging sites, ballistic missile launching sites, oil refining sites. These are the sinews of Russia's war economy, and unless we can take them out, Russia is going to be able to perpetuate its brutal invasion of Ukraine. Joe Biden has to act decisively and urgently to allow Ukraine to win this war, not simply not lose it.
Looking ahead to 2025, what happens in the Israel-Gaza conflict? Where does that go from here?
There's so many agendas at play in the Middle East that I would not want to prognosticate. What I can say is this. I do not see as big of a shift in U.S. strategy towards Israel as I do potentially with Ukraine and Russia. Regrettably, Donald Trump is pro-Putin, whereas in the Middle East, the degrees of freedom that any U.S. president has is quite limited by Israel's agenda and Iran's agenda. And I don't actually see a significant shift one direction or the other. What I have heard early indications of is that Trump wants to cut off Iranian oil exports to China, and that he intends to greenlight further Israeli strikes against Iran. I'd likely support both of those things.
Any concerns that then that would lead to a wider escalation in the Middle East and, frankly, all-out war, troops on the ground?
The United States should not allow itself to be pulled into boots on the ground in the Middle East. We've been there for 20 years, don't want to go back there. What we do have to do, though, is support our democratic ally fighting against Iran's campaign against its right to exist. Now, Iran is doing that by funding proxy terror groups, and it's paying for those proxy terror groups by shipping oil to China. And by severing Iran's connection with China, and then by representing to Iran that we're not just going to fight back against the proxy terror groups and Hezbollah and Hamas. You yourself, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is going to feel the repercussions of your aggression. I think that can actually de-escalate the Middle East by demonstrating that there is consequences for belligerents.
All right.